Hello, and thank you for turning on this video. This is a little bonus video, and so there'll be no charge for this one. I just wanted to come to you in the middle of the week to bring you something that I discovered over the weekend that I thought was interesting and relevant. Of course, I know all of us are tired of the pandemic and tired of dealing with COVID and all the different things that are going on, but it's worthwhile to remember that we're not the first ones to experience something like this. And there have been, of course, epidemics and pandemics and plagues and pestilences of all kinds throughout history. In the 14th century, what was called the Black Death or the bubonic plague arrived for the first time in Europe, and it killed 25% of the population at that time. And periodically it would reemerge, and a pandemic or an epidemic would break out in different places. And in the 15th century, there were at least 4 more of these epidemics of the Black Death or the bubonic plague. Now, Martin Luther, the great reformer and theologian, he lived through 3 of these. And when the first one occurred in August of 1527, he was living in Wittenberg at the time. And it first broke out on August the 2nd in 1527. By the 19th, there were already 18 deaths from the plague. And the political leader at the time, the Elector of Saxony, he urged Luther and the other professors at the university to leave town and to escape the epidemic. But Luther refused to leave because he was concerned about his congregation and that they would need his help. So he stayed in Wittenberg throughout the period of time in which this terrible, dangerous plague was raging. And ironically, just a few weeks before, in July of that same year, 1527, he had received a letter from a fellow minister in another town where the plague had erupted, asking him if it were permissible for the clergy to flee the town, to leave town. And so after staying in Wittenberg for several weeks, actually months, in November of 1527, Luther finally got around to answering this other minister and wrote him a long letter giving his perspective. And I think, of course, this letter has survived, and it was been published under the title, "Whether One May Flee a Deadly Plague." And I think Luther's words and his reasoning are very pertinent and relevant for us today. Now, of course, his letter is a very long letter. In the beginning part, he advises his brother, this fellow minister, named Johann, let me tell you his name here, Hess. Johann Hess, to remain with his flock and to act out of Christian charity and to be more concerned with others than himself and so forth. But then he brings up something else I thought was really interesting, and it just lets you know that human nature has not changed, and the same kinds of mindsets that are prevalent today among Christians were also prevalent in Luther's day. There were many people in Luther's day who didn't take the plague very seriously, among Christians, that is. And Luther addresses himself to that, and it's interesting what he says. So let me read you from Luther's letter, which is published under the title, "Whether One May Flee from a Deadly Plague." This is the concluding part of his letter. He says, "Others are too rash and reckless, tempting God and disregarding everything which might counteract death and the plague. They disdain the use of medicines. They do not avoid places and persons infected by the plague, but are light-hearted and make sport of it and wish to prove how independent they are. They say that it is God's punishment, and if He wants to protect them, He can do so without medicines or without carefulness. This is not trusting God. This is tempting God. God has created medicines and provided us with intelligence to guard and take good care of our bodies so that we can live in good health. If one makes no use of intelligence or medicine when he could do so without detriment to his neighbor, such a person injures his own body and must beware lest he become a suicide in God's eyes. By the same reasoning, a person might forego eating and drinking, clothing and shelter, and boldly proclaim his faith that if God wanted to preserve him from starvation and cold, he could do so without food and clothing. Actually, that would be suicide. It is even more shameful for a person to pay no heed to his own body and to fail to protect it against the plague the best he is able, and then to infect and poison others who might have remained alive if he had taken better care of his body as he should have. He is thus responsible before God for his neighbor's death, and he is a murderer many times over. Indeed, such people behave as though a house were burning in the city and nobody were trying to put the fire out. Instead, they give leeway to the flames so that the whole city is consumed, saying that if God so willed, he could save the city without water to quench the fire. Luther goes on and says, "No, my dear friends, that is no good. Use medicine. Take potions which can help you. Fumigate the house, the yard, the street. Shun persons and places where your neighbor does not need your presence or has recovered, and act like a man who wants to help put out the burning city. What else is the epidemic but a fire, which instead of consuming wood and straw devours life and body? You ought to think this way. Very well, by God's decree the enemy has sent this poison among us. Therefore I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. Then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine, and take it myself. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed, in order not to become contaminated and thus perchance infect and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. If God should wish to take me, he will surely find me, and I have done what he has expected of me, so I am not responsible either for my own death or the death of others. If my neighbor needs me, however, I shall not avoid place or person, but will go freely, as stated above." You see, this is such a God-fearing faith because it is neither brash nor foolhardy and does not tempt God. Now, I think his advice here, though I disagree with him in the idea that God sent it, I don't believe God sends plagues or epidemics or things of that kind, but I do like what he says, that a person should do what is within their power to do. And, it should be remembered that what Luther has to say here, he's not just shooting off the cuff, not just shooting his mouth off. He lived through a plague, deadlier and more serious than what we're living through. So he's speaking out of his own firsthand experience. And I also like what he has to say because it reminds us that there's no contradiction between taking personal responsibility and faith. In fact, observing common sense precautions such as social distancing and wearing of masks, it's not a violation of civil liberties, and it does not demonstrate a lack of faith, but instead it demonstrates a simple concern for the well-being of others. You should remember that in the current situation, the CDC says 40 to 50% of people who contract COVID don't even know they have it. They are asymptomatic and are capable of spreading it to others. And maybe you might not have a serious reaction to it, but you might spread it to someone else. I like what Luther says here in this letter. I don't want to be guilty of causing someone else harm or death through my negligence. So I just wanted to share that with you as a little bit of encouragement. I know everyone's tired of all the restrictions and the things we have to observe because of that. But just think of it this way. We are acting out of concern for our neighbors and for others around us, not just behaving in a selfish way and doing what we might like to do. So that's just a little bonus word of encouragement today, and we'll be back with you again this weekend for a regular Bible lesson on Sunday.